You know that weird feeling when you walk into a grocery store and everything just feels expensive? Like you're standing there holding a carton of eggs that costs almost as much as a full meal used to cost a few years ago, and you're doing this mental calculation, wondering if you're just imagining it or if money really doesn't stretch the way it used to. And then you check your bank account and realize your salary hasn't exactly kept pace with the price of, well, anything. It's this quiet, creeping anxiety that sits in the back of your mind every time you swipe your card. My name is Nick, and I spend way too much time thinking about money, economics, and why the purchasing power of a dollar seems to be in a constant state of flux, sometimes slowly eroding, other times behaving in ways that make economists genuinely nervous. And here's the thing that most people don't realize. The entire battle between inflation and deflation isn't just some abstract economic concept debated in boardrooms and central bank meetings. It's literally the invisible force shaping whether you can afford your rent next year, whether your savings are actually growing or slowly dying, and whether the economy around you is humming along or quietly collapsing. But here's what I want you to understand by the end of this, because honestly, once you see how inflation and deflation actually work, you start noticing their fingerprints everywhere. You'll understand why central banks sometimes want a little inflation, why deflation sounds good but can be absolutely catastrophic, and most importantly, how to position yourself financially no matter which direction the economy is heading. Because the truth is, most people are playing a game they don't understand, and that lack of understanding costs them quietly every single day. So let's talk about what's really happening to your money. The basics, what inflation and deflation actually mean. Okay, so at the most basic level, inflation means prices are going up. Deflation means prices are going down. Simple, right? Except it's not really about the prices themselves. It's about what your money can do. Think of it this way. Imagine you have a $100 bill in your pocket. Inflation means that same $100 bill buys you less stuff over time. Maybe today it gets you a decent grocery haul, but in 5 years it barely covers the basics. Your money hasn't disappeared, it's just weaker. It's like watching your currency slowly lose its muscle. Deflation is the opposite. That $100 becomes more powerful. Prices drop, so suddenly you can buy more with the same amount of money. And you might be thinking, wait, that sounds amazing. Why wouldn't we want that? And honestly, that's the question that trips up a lot of people, because deflation sounds like a good deal until you understand what it actually does to an economy. Here's the thing. Inflation in small doses is kind of like the economy's metabolism. It keeps things moving. Businesses raise prices slightly, wages gradually increase to match, people keep spending because they know prices will be higher tomorrow, and the whole system churns forward. It's not perfect, but it creates momentum. But deflation? Deflation is like the economy holding its breath. When prices are falling, people stop spending. Why buy that car today when it'll be cheaper next month? Why invest in a business when the money you're sitting on is literally becoming more valuable by doing nothing? It creates this waiting game, this paralysis, and economies need movement to survive. So let's talk about inflation first, because it's what most of us are familiar with, especially if you've been alive for the past few years. There's this classic economic phrase, inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. And I know that sounds like textbook jargon, but it's actually a perfect way to visualize it. Imagine you have a $100 bill in your pocket. Inflation means that same $100 bill buys you less stuff over time. Maybe today it gets you a decent grocery haul, but in 5 years it barely covers the basics. Your money hasn't disappeared, it's just weaker. It's like watching your currency slowly lose its muscle. I remember talking to my neighbor a while back, and she was telling me about how she used to budget $100 a week for groceries and had plenty left over. Now she's spending $150 and cutting corners. Same job, same income, but the buying power just evaporated. That's inflation in action, silent, persistent, and brutal if you're not prepared for it. Why governments actually want some inflation. Now here's where it gets interesting and honestly kind of counterintuitive. Central banks, like the Federal Reserve in the US, actually target a specific inflation rate, usually around 2% per year. And you might be thinking, why would they want my money to lose value? Because a little of inflation greases the wheels of the economy. It encourages spending and investment. If you know that your cash will be worth slightly less next year, you're more likely to spend it or invest it today. Businesses are more likely to borrow money, expand, hire people. It creates growth. Also, and this is huge, inflation makes debt easier to pay off. Remember how inflation makes debt easier to pay off? Deflation does the opposite. If you took out a mortgage 10 years ago and inflation has been running at 2 to 3% annually, your salary has probably increased with inflation, but your mortgage payment stayed the same. So, relatively speaking, that payment is easier to handle now. Governments love this because they carry massive debt, and inflation quietly erodes the real value of what they owe. But, and this is critical, this only works if inflation stays low and predictable. When it spins out of control, when you get into 5%, 7%, 10% territory, that's when everything breaks down. There have been moments in history when inflation didn't just tick up, it exploded. Germany in the 1920s, Zimbabwe in the 2000s, Venezuela more recently. We're talking inflation rates in the thousands of percent. Money became so worthless that people were literally using wheelbarrows full of cash to buy bread. Inflation destroys savings, wipes out the middle class, and creates social chaos. It happens when governments print money recklessly, usually to pay off debts or fund programs they can't afford. And once it starts, it's incredibly hard to stop because trust in the currency evaporates. This is why central banks are so obsessed with keeping inflation under control. A little is good, a lot is catastrophic. All right, so now let's talk about deflation, because this is where things get really weird. On the surface, deflation sounds great. Prices are falling, your money is worth more, you can buy more stuff. But here's the problem. If everyone knows prices are going to be lower tomorrow, they stop buying today. Businesses see sales drop, so they cut prices further to move inventory. They lay off workers. Those workers have less money to spend, so demand drops even more. Prices fall further, more layoffs. It becomes this vicious spiral. Japan went through this in the 1990s and 2000s, what economists call the lost decades. Deflation set in, and despite all efforts, the economy just stagnated. People hoarded cash instead of spending it. Investment dried up. It was economically suffocating. And here's the really scary part. Deflation makes debt heavier. Remember how inflation makes debt easier to pay off? Deflation does the opposite. If you took out a mortgage 10 years ago and deflation kicks in, your income might drop, but your mortgage payment stays the same. Suddenly, that debt is crushing. So what do you actually do with this information? How do you protect yourself whether we're in an inflationary period or, God forbid, deflation hits? For inflation, invest in assets that tend to rise with inflation: real estate, stocks, commodities. Your cash loses value, but assets with real worth tend to hold or gain. Also, if you have debt at a fixed interest rate, inflation actually works in your favor over time. For deflation, cash becomes king. If prices are falling and your money is gaining value, holding cash is actually a solid move. But deflation also means you want to avoid taking on debt, because you'll be paying it back with money that's worth more than when you borrowed it. The tricky part, you don't always know which one is coming, so the smartest move is usually diversification. Own some real assets, keep some cash reserves, avoid over-leveraging yourself with debt, and stay flexible.
The big picture, why this matters to your life. Look, I get it. Economics can feel distant and theoretical, but inflation and deflation are shaping your financial reality every single day. They determine whether your savings grow or shrink, whether your paycheck feels adequate or inadequate, whether your debt feels manageable or crushing. You understanding these forces doesn't just make you smarter, it makes you more prepared. You stop being a passive victim of economic cycles and start positioning yourself to weather them or even benefit from them. Because the truth is, the game is happening whether you understand the rules or not, and the people who come out ahead are usually the ones who saw what was coming and adjusted accordingly. You don't need to be an economist, you just need to pay attention, understand the basics, and make decisions that protect your future self. And honestly, that's more than most people ever do. But you're here, learning, thinking critically about how money works in the real world. That already puts you ahead. So keep asking questions, keep learning, and remember, your financial future isn't something that just happens to you. It's something you build, one smart decision at a time.